What's up, guys? I'm really obsessed with lighting and camera gear, but I usually don't get excited about software. So today's a special day because I'm really pumped to show you Luminar 4. I've gotten tons of emails and ads over the past few years over the next best photo editing software, but nothing has ever really blown me away compared to Lightroom and Photoshop. I've dabbled in CaptureOne and DxO and a few other pieces of software, but Adobe software has always made the most sense for my brain. You may have already seen or heard about it, but the big feature in Luminar 4 is the AI sky replacement, and it's just as good as everybody says. It's honestly pretty crazy how fast and easy it is to replace the sky in an image, even if there's a lot of tree branches or little pieces of sky scattered throughout the photo. It usually takes under a minute and honestly looks better than you could do in Photoshop in 30 minutes. The software comes with a handful of replacement skies, and they sell a whole bunch of extras on their marketplace for about 25 bucks, which is pretty expensive, especially considering how cheap the software is at just 79 bucks.
If you use the code NEWLAYER at checkout, check the links in the description.
As I've been playing with Luminar, I started creating my own sky packs because I don't want to use the same ones that everyone else is using that come with the software. It's not really a good look to have the same sky in your photos as other popular photographers, so you usually have to buy some extras or create your own. And don't let anyone fool you, there are a lot of really big name photographers that use Luminar 4 specifically for this functionality. Now, I'm not saying all or even the majority of good looking landscape photos have used sky replacement, but think of it like performance-enhancing drugs in sports. Some people use it, some people don't, but the people that do usually keep it a secret. So far I've captured somewhere around 100 skies, so if you watch the rest of the video, I'll show you examples of those in use and give you a link to some of the freebies you can download at newlayer.com. So the AI sky replacement is obviously the big draw in Luminar 4, but it does have a full raw photo editing workflow, and there are some other tools that are really nice and speed up your workflow. I'm not going to cover everything in this video, but I am going to show you what I think are the game-changing tools in Luminar, and then I'm going to show you how to use the AI sky replacement feature. So let's hop onto the computer and take a look. The very first thing I want to mention is to make sure that you restart your computer after you install Luminar. I always ignore when prompts tell me to restart, but this is one time where it actually matters. So I was having all kinds of issues until I restarted, so make sure that you do that first. At first glance, Luminar 4 looks like a pretty basic photo editor. If you come over here to the right, you'll see the Essentials, the Creative, the Portrait, and the Pro tabs. So if you come up and look at the Essentials panel, you'll see a lot of the same stuff that you see within Lightroom or other software. So if you come up to the light panel, you'll see all of your basic color and contrast adjustments, and it's just like the basic panel in Lightroom. The AI Enhance panel is where you'll start to get more interesting things, and the first thing that we're going to look at is the AI Accent slider. So this slider is kind of like a combination of the contrast, clarity, and dehaze sliders in Lightroom, and it also seems to add a little more vibrance or saturation. So to me, it all looks a little more natural than those sliders in Lightroom, and most importantly, it does the job of multiple sliders at once, and it does it pretty well. So if I take it from 0 to 100, you'll see that it does all of those things and just basically enhances the image with really no effort at all. The AI Sky Enhancer slider also does a few of the tricks that you can do in the HSL panel in Lightroom. So usually to enhance a sky, you'd go in and increase the saturation and decrease the luminance of just the blues to get a deeper blue looking sky. And this slider basically does both of those things at once, and it generally does it really well as long as you don't go overboard. So you can see if I take it all the way up to 100, it makes the sky a lot darker and bluer. But again, typically you don't want to go that high, but it just makes it really easy to do with just one slider. Under the AI Structure panel, you'll see Amount and Boost. So to me, the Amount is a lot like the Clarity slider in Lightroom, and Boost is a lot like Texture. They do give a slightly different look than Lightroom, but they're pretty comparable, except for the fact that the Amount slider is the only one that lets you go negative, and Boost only goes from 0 to 100, so that's kind of interesting. So if you take the Amount slider to the left, it kind of blurs the texture out of the image and makes it a little more dreamy, and if you take it to the right, it adds a lot of sharpness and contrast. Same thing with the Boost slider. If you take it from 0 to 100, it adds contrast to the image as well. But like I said, it works more like the texture slider, so it's kind of less dramatic. The color panel has all of your hue, saturation, and luminance adjustments, plus it also has the remove color cast slider, which does basically what it says. And as long as you keep it to a moderate amount, it really does a good job at removing color cast from most images. I'm not really going to get into the black and white conversion, the details enhancer, and the denoise panels because they're pretty standard and comparable to what you see in other editing software. The landscape enhancer panel is one tab that has some pretty cool stuff. So there's the dehaze slider, and you would think it would be similar to Lightroom, but honestly it adds a lot of color cast back into the image compared to Lightroom. So I usually use the AI Enhance tab that I mentioned earlier for dehazing. So if I take it from 0 to 100, you can see that it starts adding a lot of color into the image. Now this is actually a JPEG that I took with my phone, so it's worse on this than it is with RAW files, but it seems to do it on any image no matter what. The golden hour slider does basically what you think it does. It adds or enhances the look of golden hour in your photos. So if your photo was taken at high noon like this one, it's not really going to help, or it's not really going to look realistic. So it works better to enhance the real glow you get from a photo taken in the early morning or the late evening. So here's an image that was taken when the sun was really low in the sky. So you can see if I take the golden hour slider from left to right, it'll just enhance that golden glow you get from the sun being that low. And of course, if you take it up too high, it starts to look unnatural, so less is more in this slider, just like with a lot of the others. Foliage Enhancer is a pretty great slider because again, it combines a few different sliders into just one. So in Lightroom, you can do something similar using the HSL tab again to adjust the settings for just the yellow and green foliage. But the way this one works is a little more streamlined and optimized to grab just the right colors with the least amount of work. The one downside to this is that it really only works to increase the saturation or change the color of the foliage. So if you do want to go in and desaturate the greens or the yellows, you can still do that, but you have to go into the HSL section of the color panel. So if I increase from 0 to 50 or so, you can see that it really makes the greens a lot brighter. And obviously I'm just doing this as an example, you wouldn't really want to go that high, but you can also come down to the foliage hue and change that green to a more teal color or a more yellow color. And then again, you can go in and edit your mask so it doesn't apply to other green areas of your image that aren't the actual foliage. The last thing you'll see in the Essentials tab is the Vignette panel, and there's one slider in here that I want to show you guys that really helps me and speeds up my workflow. So the overall exposure of this image is pretty good to me, and I'm going to come in and add a vignette here. And that looks pretty good, bringing more attention to the building, but I think it just makes the overall image a little too dark. Now in Lightroom, you'd have to go back to the basic panel and increase the exposure of the overall image, then go back into the vignette and drop it even more. Or you'd have to create two separate masks to brighten up the middle of the image and leave the edges alone. In Luminar, there's the inner light slider down here, and that basically allows you to set your vignette and then just adjust the inner area of the image to bring the exposure up without having to go into multiple other tabs. I think it's a really simple and useful workflow tweak, and I use it all the time, and it just saves me from having to go back and forth. So I can take it from 0 and just increase it a little bit, even to just 15 or so, and that brightens up the center of the image while retaining the dark vignette around the edges. So you can see the before and the after. So that's all my favorite stuff in the Essentials tab. Now let's get into the funnest part, which is the Creative tab. So the first thing that you'll see is the AI Sky Replacement panel, and this is by far the best part of Luminar 4. The beauty of this sky replacement is that it basically does all of the masking and color matching for you, which are the two most time-consuming things when you're doing sky replacement in something like Photoshop. One thing I want to mention real quick is that if you come up here, you'll see the Layers tab, and Luminar does have layers like Photoshop, and it does matter a bit what order you do things in. I usually do the basic color and contrast correction on the main image layer, as well as anything under the Creative or Portrait tabs. So that includes sky replacement, and when I'm doing portraits, all of those adjustments. And then I'll create a new adjustment layer and do things like split toning or other creative enhancements from there. I mean, sometimes I'll do it all just on the main image layer and get better results, so you kind of have to find what works best for you. But that's part of why I like Luminar though. There's a bit of a creative process, whereas in Lightroom, sometimes I feel like I'm just doing busy or production work to get stuff done. So if I go back into the AI Sky Replacement panel, you can see that I've already loaded one of my skies in here. And if I turn that off, you can see the before and the after. So I'm going to zoom in here on this palm tree, and you can really see how well it does at masking and color matching. So something like this would be really difficult to mask in Photoshop because it has a lot of small feathered edges. But you can see even these small areas of blue in here, Luminar has automatically masked and replaced and blended together really seamlessly. And overall, this entire sky replacement took me probably 30 seconds, and to do it this well in Photoshop would probably take around 30 minutes. So just to show you a little bit of my workflow, again, I went into the layers panel and created an adjustment layer. And then in the basic panel, I changed some of the settings for light, as well as AI enhance and some of the color. And if I turn this layer off and back on, you can see that it adjusts the entire image as a whole after I've done the sky replacement. So again, here's the before and here's the final after. So let's open a different image and we'll go over all of the settings in the AI sky replacement panel. So the first thing that you can do is come down to the drop down menu, and these are all the built-in default skies in Luminar 4. And you can also load custom images. So I'm using an image that I created that I'm giving away as a freebie in a little set. So if you want to download that at newlayer.com, make sure you look at the links in the description. The first slider you'll see is the horizon blending slider, and what that does is just fades the horizon. And if you have a photo that has a little bit of haze out in the distance, this can really help to blend it more naturally. So the default is 20 and usually works pretty well, but you can also increase this all the way up to 200. And it will just blend this area towards the horizon better. If you have an image like my palm tree image that we just looked at, you can change the horizon blending to 0 because the sky fills the whole frame, and if you have blending on, you'll get a little bit of a gradient at the bottom. The horizon position does just what it says, and you can move that up or down. But 99% of the time, Luminar gets this perfectly right, and if you move it down, it can usually look really unnatural, and moving it up can sometimes give you a little stripe because it's trying to blend where there's no image right here. So you really don't have to touch that unless something doesn't look right by default. Next is the Relight Scene slider, and this is one of the game-changing sliders for me. This will automatically adjust the color, brightness, and contrast in your image and shifts everything towards those that are in your replacement sky. So if your sky and your photos don't match perfectly, this can really help blend them together seamlessly. So if you set the Relight Scene slider to 0, the sky colors will not affect the rest of the image. But if you take it up to 100, it will do the maximum amount of processing to try to match the sky and the rest of the photo. I usually work around 25 to 35%, and that'll start to match them better but still give me a natural look. Without getting too technical, the Sky Global slider basically tells Luminar how much of the image to consider the sky, and usually slight tweaks to this slider is all you need to perfect your mask. So if you've got a lot of branches or small little areas of sky, or you have a really blurred out background, that's when you need to adjust this and test out the different settings, but usually the default does a pretty good job right off the bat. I also want to mention that because Luminar has layers, blend modes, and masking, you can actually add reflections of your replacement skies to any water in your photos. So if you want to see how to do that, leave a comment and make sure you subscribe, and if this video gets enough likes and feedback on that, I'll put together a little tutorial in the near future. It's a few-minute process, and I just didn't want to drag out this video any longer because there's a lot that I want to cover already. If you come down under Advanced Settings, there's a lot of really useful tools. So the Close Gap slider helps you tweak your sky mask in places like tree branches or where there's a lot of little tiny areas of sky. The Sky Local slider is similar to Sky Global, but it works on a different scale. So by trying a combination of these two sliders, you can really perfect your mask. Sky Defocus will blur your sky, so if you do have an image with a shallow depth of field, you can blur the background and make it look more natural, and you kind of have to eyeball this to make it match. Now, if I have a really super sharp image, I leave this set at 0, but a lot of the time I find that setting it to 1 is the most realistic. And I also want to mention that when you have the defocus set to 1 and you're looking at the preview image that fits your screen like this, it'll actually look blurrier than the final image, so I recommend adjusting that slider when you're zoomed in to 100%. So the sky looks really blurry right now, but if I zoom into 100%, it'll give me a more accurate representation of what it'll look like when I export this image. The atmospheric haze slider is another really important one in my opinion. And if you have a sky that matches the overall lighting and looks good, but the blues are just too deep and dark, you can increase the atmospheric haze to wash it out a bit so it blends better. So I have this set pretty high at around 80, and if I take it down to 0, you'll see that the sky was a lot more contrasty and dark, and it just doesn't match the rest of the image that well. So I find on images where I have to use this slider, I have to take it up to at least 50 to make it look better, and sometimes all the way up to 80 or 90 looks best. So that obviously decreases how dramatic your sky looks, but I would prefer it to look a little more realistic. The sky temperature slider lets you make your sky look a little bit cooler or warmer so it matches the white balance of your image a little better. And lastly, you have the sky exposure slider, and that lets you brighten or darken the overall exposure of the sky. And the really important thing to note is that if you have the relight scene slider turned up at all, adjusting the sky exposure will also adjust the overall exposure of the image. So you'll need to try different combinations of these two sliders to get the best results. So if we look at some of these photos before and after, you can see that the sky replacement isn't just for beautiful landscapes. It obviously works really well for that, but you can't always control the weather when you're shooting. So it's also really helpful to make boring images look less boring, and you can use it in portraits or architectural photography, and even things like real estate photography. You can really make the outside of a house look a lot better by adding an interesting sky. There's a lot of other panels under the Creative tab, but they're all pretty standard, or I think they're kind of gimmicky, so I wouldn't use them all the time. The AI sky replacement is definitely the most important one you'll find here. Now, if we go over here and go under the Portraits tab, there's a ton of sliders in here that are huge time savers. And my favorites are all under the AI Portrait Enhancer panel. I'm going to increase some of these more than I typically would, just so you can see the effects a little better. So the first slider you'll see is the Face Light slider, and this is a game changer for me. In Lightroom, I'm constantly adding a radial mask on faces to bump the exposure by 1/3 to about 1/2 of a stop. But this slider does that automatically, and it does a better job of masking and ignoring the areas that it shouldn't lighten. This is such a good slider, I really can't stress that enough. So you can see that if I take it back down to 0, just the face gets darker, and if I take it back up, just the face gets lighter. So it's a really great way to bring attention to the face and still have it look really natural, and it just makes my editing much, much faster. It's basically the same thing with all of these sliders. The AI masking in Luminar 4 is just so good, and it saves so much time. So for example, if I take eye whitening down, you can see that the whites of the eyes get a little darker, and if I take it all the way up, they get a lot brighter. Obviously the best setting is somewhere in between. Same thing with the eye enhancer slider. This will work on the sharpness, the contrast, and the color of the eyes and just make them pop. Usually this requires brushing a mask on the eyes and adjusting things like the clarity, the saturation, and stuff like that. But this does it all automatically with one slider, so it's a huge time saver. Now let me preface all this by saying that cameras don't capture all of the subtlety and detail that we catch when we're looking at something or someone in person. So one of the best ways to convey the real look or feeling that we saw is by enhancing someone's eyes. And these sliders do it really well and in just a few seconds. Like I said, it doesn't take any manual masking, but of course you can always manually adjust the mask later if you want. The dark circles removal slider works really well, and normally I wouldn't use it on a kid portrait like this, but with adults or especially older people, this can really help a lot. The Slim Face 2.0 and Enlarge Eyes slider do exactly what they say, and I typically don't use these because I want the person to look exactly what they look like in real life, just a better version of themselves, so I'm not judging people that do use these, but I personally just don't use them. The Improve Eyebrow slider is pretty cool. It'll kind of fill in the eyebrows and make them stand out a little bit more. So if you want that look, it's super simple. And then you have the lip saturation, redness, and darkening, which do exactly what they say. And lastly, the teeth whitening, which is one of the more important ones. A lot of times in Lightroom, people will mask off the teeth and then they'll just try to take some of the yellow out, but that makes the teeth look gray and unnatural. And I find that this teeth whitening slider works much better. Even if you take it all the way up to 100%, it still looks really natural. I really, really wish Lightroom had these sliders because you could apply changes to so many images seamlessly, whereas now you have to create and adjust masks for basically every single photo individually, and it takes a ton of time. So I did some other edits to this photo, but if I just turn off only the AI Portrait Enhancer panel, you can see the before and the after. And even with the exaggerated settings I used, it still looks really natural and realistic, and I think makes this portrait so much better. And most importantly, it's just so much easier to use because I don't have to do any masking. So I've probably covered less than half of the stuff inside Luminar so far in this video, but I find the rest of it to be pretty similar to other software or something gimmicky that I'll never really use. And there are a few issues that I have with Luminar that you might find annoying. I don't think it's well suited to batch editing a lot of photos at once, mainly because it's really slow when you're switching between images. So if I click this image and I wait for it to finish loading it so I can start editing, it takes a really long time, about 10 or 15 seconds, and sometimes even longer if you're using really high resolution photos like from a Sony A7R Mark III or something like that. Something else that's really annoying, and it just doesn't make sense, when you go down into the curves area on the light panel, if you start adjusting this curve, the underlying histogram changes. This should work like Lightroom, where the histogram up here at the very top changes. The curve's histogram should never change, because once that histogram changes, the curve that you're drawing is no longer accurate. So hopefully they'll fix that in an update. I think it's mostly an oversight because it just makes no sense to me, and it makes working with curves kind of a hassle because you have to rely almost solely on the image itself instead of using your eye on the image and the technical data from the histogram at the same time. The third thing that I find annoying is if you have multiple layers like I do in this image, you can't edit the lower layers without turning off the layers above them. So if I want to go into the main image layer and edit something, it automatically turns those off, and there's no way to turn those on without selecting them. So this can be annoying if you want to just go into the basic panel of the bottom layer and make really slight tweaks, but you still want to see the final results of all the layers combined. You just can't do that. So the original title for this video is going to be something like Why I'm Leaving Lightroom Forever, but obviously that's pretty clickbaity and just not true. However, Luminar is going to be a part of my workflow going forward. I think the workflow in Luminar excels in creating individual unique images and getting a little more creative with your editing. When it comes to landscapes especially, the weather's not always going to cooperate and give you the best skies, so it's really nice to be able to easily enhance your photos and replace those and be able to post something a little more aesthetically pleasing. Now I know a lot of you are going to say, but that's just posting fake images, but photography is art, and to me that's like saying the Marvel movies are bad because Iron Man's suit can't exist in real life, so shut your pie hole. If you're posting an image and lying about it, that's one thing, but if you're just trying to share cool looking photos, then go for it. I would highly recommend just buying it and trying it out because there's a 30-day guarantee and you can always get your money back if you don't think you're going to use it. I got in touch with Skylum about this video and they gave me a $10 off coupon to share with you guys, so make sure you check the links in the description. I also have a freebie pack of replacement skies that you can get at newlayer.com, as well as some other packs that are much cheaper than the packs in the Skylum marketplace. Check those out if you're interested, or if you're not interested and you just want to support the channel, then I won't complain. So what do you guys think? Do you think the AI sky replacement tool is gimmicky, or do you see yourself using it in your work? Are any of the other tools something you wish you had in your current software? Because I know I wish some of these sliders were available in Lightroom. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts, and make sure you hit subscribe and click the bell notification so you don't miss the next video. That's it for now, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.